Hello everyone and welcome to Ruby's Classic Cooking. Today I am making date squares. And date squares are a really lovely dessert to make, very old fashioned. And I used to make them for weddings. And if you know anything about history, you know that dates came from a long distance away and were expensive. So there's no wonder that people only made these for very special occasions. But today I thought I'd make these for you, just to show you how they're done. They're really delicious. It only makes an 8-inch square pan of them, mind you, but this is going to have a lovely thick date filling because this recipe calls for 2 cups of dates, and my older recipe only calls for 1 cup of dates. So you see, this is going to be much datier filling. I've chopped my dates up already. I just took them and chopped them up into pieces because even though they say they're pitted, I don't believe them, because pitted dates, sometimes the machine misses one. And you know what? You only have to bite down on 1 date to break a tooth or break a filling. And that can be a very expensive trip to the dentist. So I always double check. When I'm using cherries or glacé cherries, even if they're supposed to be pitted, I always check them by chopping them up with my knife. So I've been chopping dates. So I have all my ingredients ready to go. First of all, I have to cook my date filling, which is put it all in a saucepan, put it on the stove, cook it, let it cool a bit. Then I make my base, which is very healthy because there's a lot of rolled oats in it, which is very good for you. So date squares are healthy, right? Of course they are. Alrighty, no whipped cream involved though. Darn, too bad. I got my recipe over here in the corner, so I think I'm just going to bring that over here so I can read it while I'm talking to you. And I'll put it in the description below, by the way, if you're looking for the recipe for this later. Okay, so the description below, as they say. Okay, 2 cups of chopped dates go into my saucepan. And it's a generous 2 cups of dates because I got lots of dates and I want to use them up, actually. That's why I'm doing this. 3/4 of a cup of corn syrup. 3/4 of a cup of corn syrup. So that goes in there. Now 2 cups of dates is about 500 milliliters. And 3/4 of a cup is about 175 milliliters. That's corn syrup. And a 1/2 cup of water, which is about a little lot less than 150. That's about 140 probably milliliters of water. And a 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla, which, let's see, what's that? That's a 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla is 2 milliliters of vanilla. So, I'm just going to put a little bit in here and put that in there. There. Okay. Cover up my vanilla here. And also 1 to 2 tablespoons of lemon juice. Now you can, that's 15. A tablespoon is 15 milliliters, so that's 15 to 30 milliliters. Now I fresh squeezed this lemon juice because I happen to have some lemons in the freezer in my fridge. But if you don't happen to have any lemons, they sell real lemon juice at the grocery store. You can buy a bottle of that and use it. So anyway, this goes in my saucepan, and I have to bring it to a boil and let it simmer till it's thickened and soft. Then I set it aside to cool. So I'm going to leave you now, and I'll come back and I'll show you what this all looks like when it's all done up. So here it is in my saucepan. You can see that, right? How that looks in there. That's all my dates and all the stuff is dumped in there. And when it's done, I'll show you what it looks like. And how it makes kind of like a date jam filling for your date squares. So, all right, 15 minutes has gone by. 6 minutes to get these to a boil, and then another 10 minutes to kind of on simmer to simmer them and stir them every 5 minutes or so. And here's my lovely pot of dates, all steaming hot here right now. And you see how they're nice and kind of thickened and jammy looking. Let me just kind of tip towards the camera so you can see that. See in here, it's still steaming hot. And you can see how nice and thick those are, and all kind of, you know, you can see that they're all jammy looking. Okay? Now I'm going to put that aside to cool. If you want to get generous on the dates when you're doing this, because if you buy them, you're not going to find a nice thick jammy date filling in your date squares, because that's the expensive part. The cheap part is your good old rolled oats, oatmeal over here, and other ingredients that are not so expensive. So flour and a little bit of brown sugar and things. Out there again, 15 minutes has now elapsed, and my filling is starting to get cooled off. Nice and jammy looking and a lot cooler now. I'd say 15 to 20 minutes I'd leave that sitting to cool off. It's on how hot a day it is and so on. Okay, now on to the crust for this beauty date square crust. This is 1 1/3 cups of flour, plain old ordinary all-purpose flour. Now, if you're in the United States, you probably want to use bread flour for this, because your all-purpose flour is going to give you a different amount than that. And in Britain, the same thing. You'd have to use a hard wheat flour for that. I'm not sure what the weight is for that, but it's 1/3 of a cup, 8-ounce cup. Now, I'm going to mix into that 1 1/3 cups of packed brown sugar. Now, don't look at my brown sugar today, because Murphy, you know Murphy's Law, if something could go wrong, it will. Well, I got all the way into this recipe and I had to open a new bag of brown sugar, and it's hard as a rock, and I do mean a rock. So I tried to soften it by adding a little water to it and putting it in the microwave, and well, it got a little over enthusiastic and it's kind of a slush right now. So I'm hoping that it's going to combine well with my flour. So this does not look like your packed brown sugar ought to look like. But it's 1 1/3 cups of brown sugar, so I'm just going to go for it and hope for the best. I know it will turn out, because I'm going to be adding liquid butter to this after a while, so this isn't going to look like what should be coming out of your measuring cup. And this has been sitting here for a while, so it's probably set like cement. It has set like cement. This could be great fun to try and mix this up. Oh dear. Anyway, well, it's a little damp. It's a little damp, but it's not going to hurt anything at the end of the day. It's not going to hurt anything. Oh my goodness, but that's not really. Anyway. That's okay. Once I add the melted sugar, the melted butter to this, you know what? It's going to look just as wet as that anyway. So get this mixed in here. I'm going to add 1 1/3 cups of rolled oats to it. And here they are. And I'm going to add a 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda. Not baking powder. Remember we talked about the differences between baking powder and baking soda? Baking soda lacks some things that baking powder has. So if it calls for soda, use soda. Don't use baking powder. Don't mix them back and forth, because it will not enhance your baking experience. Although something like wet brown sugar, it just kind of doesn't look properly right, but there's just a little bit of extra moisture, like maybe a tablespoon of extra moisture, so it's not going to make a big difference in the long run. The end product, but showing you what it's supposed to look like is that's something special that's going into this today, is my melted fresh made butter. So I now have my flour and my brown sugar as integrated as I can get them, since my sugar was a little bit messed up today, but anyway, that's what housewives do. We just carry on with what we got. So now I'm going to add my 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda. Measure up my 1/2 teaspoon here. Level that off. Throw that in there. That goes to one side. And now I'm going to add my 1 1/3 cup of rolled oats. There we go. 1 1/3 cup. These are, by the way, my original measuring cups. Aluminum, aren't they lovely? They're about 50 years old. And I'm just going to stir the baking soda and the rolled oats together here. Make my lovely my lovely, lovely crust from my date squares. And then you put about half of this on the bottom and pat it down, and you put half of it on the top and pat it down with the dates in the middle as a filling. So you kind of have this date square sandwich. And then you bake it off in the oven, and they are crispy and golden and delicious and very healthy, right? Because they have all those dates in them, right? And all this, a cup and a third of rolled oats, right? It's like having a bowl of oatmeal porridge, right? Not exactly, eh? Not with all the brown sugar and the butter in them. No, I'm afraid not. This wouldn't pass muster as health food, I'm afraid. Nope. All right, now I got these mixed in, and now I have my 2/3 of a cup of butter melted, and there it is, right there in my bowl. And I'm going to pour that in here, and I'm just going to clean up my bowl here with my spatula. And that was my homemade butter, by the way. I decided I'd use some of that today in these date squares. Now I'm going to stir this in with a fork. The recipe says to stir this in with a fork. And then I'm going to take my crumb mixture, and like I said, half of it is going to go into my prepared pan, which is an 8-inch square Pyrex, my 8-inch square Pyrex pan. I only have the one. And then when I've got this assembled, I'm going to put it into the oven. And then we'll be back in, let's see, a half an hour to see the final result. And I'll have some pictures of my finished date squares. And no, I don't put whipped cream on them. They are all by themselves. As my sister would say, that would be gilding the lily. And yes, you don't need to gild the lily when it's date squares, let me tell you. I know how good they are because I've made them before. But not with my own homemade butter. And not with these special dates. Usually I just use the ones you have to pit yourselves. The cheap ones that you get, the Java dates that are on sale. You know, you get a brick of a pound, 1 pound or 454 gram block brick kind of off them, and you have to cut them apart and chop them up fine, and they're as hard as rocks to cut up, but they do soften up nicely and they make lovely date squares. But you know, if you're making date hors d'oeuvres, you wouldn't use them for that. They're strictly for baking. If I'm making anything with dates in it, especially Christmas baking, that's the kind of dates I usually use. That used to be the only kind of dates you could buy around here because it was the only kind of dates they had. But nowadays you have medjool dates, which are lovely for eating just by themselves. And lots of others. All kinds of varieties of dates. And those medjool dates are lovely for sitting down and having just all by themselves. I don't think I'd cook with them. That'd be a waste of those beautiful dates. All right, now here is my finished product, and as I suspected, it looks just like it would have if my brown sugar hadn't been a little odd ball looking today. Well, all that melted butter. There we go. See, that's what my dates, that's what my filling looks like. Now that's going to be my not my filling, but that's going to be my crust. So now I'm going to take about half of this, and I'm going to get my pan. See, here's my handy dandy pan, the same one I used to make hot water gingerbread in. And if you haven't seen that video, be sure and watch it. When it comes to my recipes, I'm now going to be putting them in the description down below when I'm writing them up, so that you can find the recipe. So I'm just going to dump half of this, roughly half of this in here. You know, like, say you want to have it like a sandwich, half the bread above, half the bread below. Let's see now. Maybe just a little bit more. In fact, I like to maybe put the bottom crust as being a little thicker than the top crust sometimes. There, see, that's what it looks like. And now I'm going to pat it down with my hand. I'm just going to take my hand and I'm just going to pat it down like that. Nice and firmly so that it's no longer crumbly. Now it's more like a crust. I'm just going to make sure I do this in the corners. Now I'm not going to bring this up on the sides of the pan. I'm just making it a nice even layer. Okay? So there it is. All patted down in there. And now in goes the good stuff, the date filling. Yum! the best part. All right. Now I'm going to spread my cooled date filling. See my cooled date filling here? Ah, isn't that lovely looking? Nice and dark. Nice and dark brown and datey looking. And there it goes. See how nice and jammy that is? That is so delicious. Let me tell you. That just turned out so nice. Very, very nicely. I'm going to scrape it with my spatula in a minute because I don't want to waste a bit of it. Because that is just going to make... And let me tell you something. If you go out and spend $5 a piece for a date square, which you easily could, you will never get one that has nearly as nice and thick a layer of dates as that, let me tell you. The only way you're going to get that is if you do it yourself. DIY. Some things are worth the effort of DIY. And date squares are one of those things that nobody spends the time and effort using real butter and that amount of dates or whatever to make your date squares. Especially not if they're trying to make a profit on them. Spread that out. And now I'm going to put the other half of my filling on top. And it goes into my preheated 350-degree oven. The other half of my dates, and put them right on top. Just like that. There we go. Put on there, and I'm just going to gently pat those down. Because I don't want to squish them so much that they're going to come out of the pan. But I also don't want them to stay crumbly. I want them to become a thing. Now look at that. Look at that. Look at that layer of dates. Look at that. I can tell you right now, you will never go to a bakery shop and buy date squares that have that many dates in them. I can guarantee that. There you go. Now it cuts into 16 pieces, it says, but you can also cut it into 9 if you're making dessert. You know, that's 9 servings of dessert. That's a pretty substantial dessert, I can tell you. Or you could cut it into 16 pieces, and you'd do 4 and 4, 2 inches by 2 inches. Anyway, I'm going to put these in my 350-degree oven now, and I will be back in a half an hour to show you what these look like, and they'll be all toasted and golden and crispy. Guess what I have just taken freshly out of my oven? 35 minutes in the oven, and look at this beautiful pan of date squares. And I still have to decide, am I going to cut them into 16 squares, or am I going to cut them into 9 squares? Oh dear, decisions, decisions. There you go. What a lovely decision to have to make. Well, right now, I'm going to leave these here until they cool off, because if I try to cut them now, it's just going to crumble and make a mess. So to make nice, tidy, neat looking date squares, you have to wait till it cools off. So even though it smells absolutely amazing and it's really tempting to want to dish into this, but you know what? I'm going to have to wait. And so I will be putting some pictures of what it looks like when I plate it up, and I'll tell you in the comments below whether I decided on 16 or 9. If I ask my husband, I know what he's going to say. He's going to say, Ruby, cut it into 9 squares, for goodness sakes. We're not hungry enough to eat 16. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this recipe, and I hope that you'll watch me next time when I'm cooking on Ruby's Classic Cooking, and I hope you'll try this recipe, and I hope you'll like my video and subscribe to my channel so you can find out what I'm going to be cooking next time on Ruby's Classic Cooking. Bye for now.